Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Professor Ming's Strategic Insights. In our previous program, we talked about that the Chinese communists are preparing for war. And there are two aspects associated with this war preparation effort, a defensive side and an offensive side. And today, I'm going to elaborate on this defensive side of their war preparation effort. I'm not sure whether you have noticed it, but for communist experts like us, we know that communists around the world share one common mentality, which is what we call a besiegement mentality. They always feel that they're encircled, they're surrounded by hostile people, by hostile nations, and there's a good reason for it. Karl Marx knew about it. He proposed a world proletarian revolution, as we discussed before. And this revolution aims at overthrowing of the capitalist mode of production and the class relationship associated with it, the social structure, political system, interpersonal relations, religions, and the so-called capitalist culture and value system. In Karl Marx's eyes, they are outdated, decayed, and moribund. As a faithful follower, Lenin was fully aware of it. Lenin knew once they overthrow the so-called capitalist regime, they are going to establish a one-party dictatorship, a totalitarian regime, which runs against human nature. And all the people and all the nations around the world will unite or join hands to expel it, to fight for it, to fight against it, and to eliminate it. And this idea or this concept of besiegement is popularly shared among communist leaders around the world. And the prominent characteristics associated with it is their paranoid attachment to political power, which I'm going to explain in future programs. And after World War II, as we mentioned, Stalin proposed the idea of confrontation between two camps, the capitalist camp or the democratic camp and the communist camp. And this is what we call the Cold War. Now let's go back to the communist ideology. Let me use the diagram again. Remember this world proletarian revolution? They're still preparing for it, only take a different form. It's not just a class struggle. It will take a form of world war with or without nuclear weapons, with or without biological and chemical weapons, but they are preparing for a war. This Cold War, or the confrontation between democracies and communist regimes, lasted for about half a century. And it's a comprehensive confrontation between the two camps, political, economic, military, cultural, and the value system. And in the end, it boils down to arms races. And arms races characterized with nuclear weapons and their launchers. And by 1989, we witnessed, I'm sure everybody remembers it, the Tiananmen massacre happened in China, which eventually led to the total collapse of the communist regimes in Eastern European countries and in Soviet Union, starting in 1989 and all the way to 1991. We witnessed the collapse of Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Soviet Union, and Mongolia, and so on and so forth. The total collapse of the Soviet bloc, or of the communist bloc, shocked the Chinese communists very much. They unexpectedly survived, but they're terrified. So they're so afraid of this, what they call a peaceful revolution or peaceful evolution. Although Communist China itself survived the turmoil, it was terrified upon watching what happened to the Soviet Union and the countries in Eastern Europe. In order to combat the so-called counter-revolution movement, they launched two major campaigns, one against people, one against people's thought. Let's talk about the people's part first. They launched a massive purge across the country. They tried to cleanse the party by hunting down each and every one who participated in the movement all over the country, more than 200 cities. You may not know, the Tiananmen protests did not occur just in Beijing, just in Tiananmen. It occurred in more than 200 cities across China. There were protests, riots, and attacks of public offices, police stations, and government offices. So Communist China mobilized its efforts all over the country to hunt down all these people. Only very few people fled the country. Most of them were arrested and thrown into jail. Some were tortured to death, some were sentenced for several years, and some were released after they served their time. And I had a chance to meet a few of them and had lengthy discussion of what happened to them. And that's a part against the people. The second part is about people's thought. We have talked about how much attention that Chinese communists have paid to people's thought. So they want to erase their memory. They call it education or re-education, but as we see it, it's totally brainwashing. They ran numerous TV programs, radio shows, newspaper articles, journal articles, pamphlets, and even a series of books, which lasted for several years. Just give you an idea of how much effort they put in there, let me show you a few books. I have here with me several books published at the time dealing with the issue. The first one is called, for those who understand Chinese, 反和平演变答问录. Roughly translated is like questions and answers on anti-peaceful evolution, published by a so-called legal publishing house in Beijing. From the title, you can tell it's about how they look at this so-called peaceful evolution issue and how to counter it or how to fight against it. And it's published in Beijing. The seventh book is called 两种价值观的透视, Insights into two value systems, namely to compare the so-called decadent bourgeois value system and the clean socialist system, two value systems. Try to compare them and try to look at the goods and bads contained in these two systems. And it's published in Jilin province, in one of the northern provinces. And the third book is 美国和平演变战略. Roughly translated is like U.S. Strategy on Peaceful Evolution. Again, it's published by Jilin province. It's a sheer condemnation of United States plot of how the United States is engineering this peaceful evolution strategy against Communist China, how they should fight against it, and how they should protect their so-called socialist value systems. And that's the third book. The fourth one is called 没有硝烟的世界大战. Roughly translated, it's like a world war without the smoke of gunpowder. Well, you can tell it by the title. It's published by Jinan City and the capital city of Shandong province, one of the northern provinces. So to them, it's a world war between two systems or two countries. Back then, it was between two camps, two systems. As we mentioned it before, a socialist system and a capitalist system. And eventually they think that the socialist system will replace and supersede the capitalist system. But before that, there will be a world war. But this time, it's a world war without the smoke of gunpowder. So that's a fourth book. The fifth book is 两个社会的较量, roughly translated as competition between two societies. Again, it's between a socialist society and between a bourgeois society. It's published by Hunan province, one of the Hunan province publishing house. It's one of the central province of China. So again, it's like a rivalry between two systems, two societies, or two value systems. That's the fifth one. The sixth one is a little bit longer in title. 坚持党的基本路线，抵御和平演变讲话 is published again by Jilin province. Roughly translated, it's like talks on insisting upon the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party's basic line, and resisting peaceful evolution. So again, this time they hold up the banner of the party's basic line. They pay much attention to what the party say and what the party line is. So this time they said it very clearly, instituting upon the party line of the party, of the CCP party, and how to resist the evolution strategy engineered by the United States again. So that's the 6th book. The last one is 民主社会主义述评. Again, it's published by Jilin. Roughly translated, is like a commentary on democratic socialism. Why do they want to combat this democratic socialism? Because they want a pure socialist socialism rather than a democratic socialism. A democratic socialism is evilish in their eyes. They tend to see it as a, what should we call it? A variety derived from what happened in the Northern European countries or the Scandinavian countries, although they call themselves socialism, but Chinese communists do not think so. They think that's deviant, and it's a pollution to their pure socialist idea. So they have to combat it. But anyway, like I said, these 7 books were published by 4 different places, and 4 different cities actually, 4 different provinces and 4 different cities, and so on and so forth. It's all written based on one guideline. The guideline was printed out and issued by the party centrals, what they call the Central Committee of the CCP. So they elaborate on these principles issued by the central of the party. But anyway, whatever they say, they consider it as all a plot or a series of plots engineered by the United States and launched against Communist China or communist regimes in Eastern European countries and in Soviet Union, and of course Mongolia too. But the question is, like I said, the campaign lasted for several years, but even today, they still worry about it. They pay much attention to it, and they mention it from time to time. As we pointed out to you in our programs from time to time, how they are concerned about this so-called peaceful evolution, peaceful revolution, color revolution, or Arab Spring. Whatever you call it, they consider it a plot against their socialist state, against their Communist Party, and against their regime. They fight against it all the way until today. You can see it very clearly in their propaganda, in their publication, and everywhere. After the massacre, the political strongman of China, Deng Xiaoping, tried to stabilize the political situation by reintroducing reforms and opening up to China, which allowed international capital to enter into China, and which led to a booming Chinese economy for almost 30 years. And China has become a world factory and a world market. In short, China has a lot of money to spend. As the Chinese were enjoying their newly acquired wealth, there were waves of democratic surge emerging in international politics. The first one is the color revolution. They'd include the 2003 Rose Revolution in Georgia, 2004 Orange Revolution in Ukraine, 2005 Purple Revolution in Iraq, and again in 2004 the Cedar Revolution in Lebanon, and the 2006 Jin Revolution in Belarus, and the Tulip Revolution in Kyrgyzstan. The Chinese communists were terrified by these revolutions, which reminded them of what happened in Soviet Union and Eastern European countries, the total collapse of the Soviet bloc or of the Communist bloc in the 1980s and 1990s. So they launched a massive campaign against it. They printed all kinds of essays, articles, ran all kinds of news, conferences, attacking and criticizing what happened in these countries. In short, they tried to brainwash their people, especially their party members. They cautioned against its happening in China. Just when the Chinese communists overcame their fear of this color revolution, there came another wave of democratic revolution in the world, the Arab Spring. Beginning in 2011, countries like Libya, Syria, Yemen, Sudan, Tunisia, Egypt, Algeria, Lebanon, and Jordan, they were all caught in various degrees of so-called democratic revolution. In these countries, many political leaders were overthrown. Some jailed, some exiled, and some killed. And again, the Chinese communists were alarmed, and they launched another wave of brainwashing effort just to fight against it. But the Chinese communists blame the United States for all these things. They think the United States were behind these revolutions, so-called revolutions. Remember last time we talked about an article printed by the Foreign Ministry of the PRC entitled United States Hegemony, Arbitrariness, Bullying, and the Detriment. It attacks the United States of imposing and exporting its value system onto and onto other countries. Things like democracy, human rights, rule of law, and their political system. It attacks the United States of promoting the so-called New Monroe Doctrine to interfere the domestic politics of other countries, and it engineered the Color Revolution and the Arab Spring. That is why Communist China hates the United States so much, and they try to attack the United States wherever and whenever they can. Nowadays, Communist China is facing serious problems both domestically and internationally. Domestically, they're experiencing economic trouble, financial shortage, high unemployment rate, social unrest, and potential political turmoils. Internationally, they think they are being targeted, contained, and isolated. So again, this besieged mentality dominates their mindset. And as we mentioned earlier, there's another offensive side of this war preparation effort, which we're going to talk about it in later program. And I think that's what I want to share with you today. I hope you like our program, and I'll see you next time.